Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Ashura Reflections. Today's session is on Ashura and growth, a very important topic, because in today's discussion, we are trying to bring the message of Imam Hussain and Ashura and Karbala down to its most fundamental level for the individual. And that is, how do I use all of this narrative and this story for my own personal development? And in order to have this discussion, we have with us Sheikh Javad Shomali, who's well known in the community for his lecturing, his research, his academia, and more recently his focus on giving practical solutions to people through social media and creative ways about living a more godly life. And in that context, we have asked him, myself and Br.Adam is joining this chat, to kind of know from him, how does he look at Ashura as a template or as a tool for personal self-development? And what parts are we neglecting from the message of Imam al-Hussein in the way that we mourn for him now? And how do we link his quite abstract and theoretical mission, the way it's put to us today, into a very practical way to just live a happy and productive and successful life? So it is a beautiful discussion. Let us begin. Beginning with the first issue, regarding Ashura as a tool for self-development, we often look at many of the large issues to do with politics and society and these universal values about a community level. But really, Imam Hussain is a very personal thing for the individual to carry. The mourner and the lover of Abu Abdullah has in Imam al-Hussain someone who is there for their personal life. Sheikh, this question to begin with, in your understanding, how is it we can use Imam al-Hussain to become a very personal Imam rather than looking at him as an idea or a distant far away concept, to make him someone who you live with? How do we make him so personal?
I think it's a very important question you ask. And I think actually with regards to Imam Hussain, he's one of the Imams with which most people have kind of personal relations. And that perhaps has to do with the way in which most of us were introduced. And, you know, the setting with which we learn about Imam Hussain is usually a very emotional setting. And often from the time when we are very young, we learn about the Imam. And because also it's put into a kind of a story, so we learn about the Imam in the context of a story. I think for many of us, it has actually been quite a personal introduction to the Imam. But of course, there is so much more that we still can do in order to make this relationship more beneficial and bring more of Imam Hussain into our life in real, meaningful ways, which I'm hoping we can talk about, inshallah, today.
Inshallah, for sure. So from the beginning of a child going to the majalis until, I guess, the end of their life, Imam Hussain is a little bit different. The majalis is a different kind of way to know an Imam than maybe for the other Aimma. But that implies then that as they grow, they develop a relationship with the Imam in terms of he's with them for the things they go through as they grow older and older and older, for different challenges. And yet it seems Imam Hussain is capable for a range of life challenges. Whenever you throw at a person, they always go back to him. How is it that he has this capacity for such a multiplicity of life problems?
Yeah, that's, I think that goes back to two main features. One is the way in which he lived, his personality, the qualities he showed, which inshallah we'll talk about as we go on today. There are so many things there which are answers to, you know, human questions for as long as there is any human, right? In the story of Imam Hussain, there are points about the value of human being. There are points about what is death. Can death be beautiful? There are points about suffering, about how much a human being can take on suffering. And how can you take suffering? Will you break under it? Will you still be strong? Will you take it with dignity? So these are the things that every human being goes through throughout their life. And we see beautiful lessons in the story of Imam Hussain. And that's why no matter where we are in life, how old we are, chances are that the experience we're going through, there are things we can take from that, from Imam Hussein. And as you said, because a lot of people, of course, I don't want to generalize, because many people have had different experiences. Like my upbringing has been in an Iranian kind of setting, maybe the Khoja one, the Pakistani one, the one for the converts. Each person may have had a different upbringing, but for many of us, we were brought up with the love of Imam Hussein, and love is a very powerful source. It has been that love that has kept this connection between us and the Imam, so that we can go and benefit from him. And but of course today I also want to be careful, and I want to not just mention all the good things that we have, but also share a few things in which we can make things better. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things I actually wanted to discuss with you today is that as it is, and of course, even as it is, there are many different ways of doing it. But let's consider the whole thing as one. And it has had so many great advantages, the whole experience of Ashura for us, right? Because in one way we can say our relationship with Imam Hussein is very much limited to Ashura, those 10 days, and then the 10th day in particular. And we don't hear much about Imam Hussein's life prior to the events that happened during Muharram. And of course, recently there has been some efforts to bring attention to Imam Hussein's life prior to those 10 days, but mainly for most of us, it's been those 10 days or afterwards, like the events towards the end of Imam Hussein's life. And because this on its own has had so much capacity for change, for establishing a relationship, we have made a shortcoming not to go to the other areas of Imam Hussein's life. Anyways, as it is, so Imam Hussein's life, only the ending of it. And the ending of it, we pay attention to, I think still, even this we're not doing justice to. There are ways, inshallah, that I discuss in which we can benefit much more from these sessions that we hold. Okay, I think I should stop at this point and let you talk as well.
Am I the one who's talking now? Can you guys hear me?
Br.Adam, you have a question, inshallah.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's a question or if a comment. Let's just see how it goes. So for me personally, I would say that I wasn't raised on the love of Imam Hussein, even though I came from a cultural Shia background, one which I wasn't given any like religious education. One thing that Sheikh, that you've said is the emotional aspect of things. And when I look at the past 10 years of my life or so, I can see that there is definitely has been some sort of an emotional connection, right?
Yeah.
But what I haven't seen is any like a significant kind of growth from myself towards being a reflection of the Imam, right? And now that, because I care about the truth more than anything in life, right? Because the way I see things is I'm a human being, and I'm asking myself, well, what is the reason that we're here, and how can I make sense of that, right? So for me, the truth isn't just a theologically abstract concept.
Yeah.
So I feel like the way at least I've been taught about Imam Hussein for the past 10 years or so, when I was regularly attending the majalis, the lectures, and even now when I'm trying to connect, it kind of feels like it's without a doubt, Ashura and what happened, without a doubt, it was a very tragic incident, and there's many positive things that we can take from the character of the Imam, right? Yeah. But when we're trying to analyze things in terms of relevancy and in terms of, well, what made this, according to our narrative, like the greatest of tragedies, I feel like the way that it's been approached is it's because he's the Imam, right? So it's kind of like you're saying, okay, I'm gonna tell you about this guy, yeah. This is his theological position, right? Yeah. And now I'm going to tell you about his story. His story is no doubt, is very tragic. It's got very inspirational moments. Yeah. But in terms of, okay, how can we actually now take that story, this person's life, and improve ours, that improves our connection with God? Yeah. I feel this part is really missing because our understanding of what an imam is, or just the grandson of the Prophet, who is at the very least a very pious man according to Muslims as a whole, I feel like that position has been taught in a very theologically abstract way, in a way that you actually can't connect with the person as a human being anymore, right? So I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you think we can correct that?
I think it's a very important point you mentioned. Although I would add that, because today, actually, I'm going to say a lot of the things in which we can do better, right? But before I say those, I also want to say the good things about what we already have, because it's definitely have had a lot of great benefits for a lot of people. And I really understand that you haven't been able to, like, or maybe to the extent that you wanted, take personal lessons from that story. You found parts of it abstract. But there have been a lot of people for whom there has been so much to take from the story of Ashura as it is presented right now, with all its shortcomings, right? So this has, there are many different aspects. For example, one is that, you know, a lot of us, unfortunately, we have not learned how to deal with our own suffering or with our own emotions. We hide them, we suppress them, we abandon ourselves to distract ourselves from the pain. And I feel like for a lot of people like this, the sessions of Imam Hussain give them a kind of opportunity to be a little bit honest, to be a little bit emotional, to, you know, to have a kind of emotional release, if I would say. And the way they do that is, you know, because like we have a lot of people who think, for example, crying is wrong, or expressing your emotions is wrong, or even if it's not wrong, they're not comfortable doing it. But you see that through the sessions, they can express their emotions, they can express their grief to some degree. And of course, by tying their own suffering to the suffering of Imam Hussain, not only they get a release from expressing their own emotions regarding their suffering, but also they get energy to know that they're not alone. They're not the only ones who are going suffering, because like Imam Hussain also went through a lot of suffering. So already it has had a lot of impact like this on people. And well, of course, there are some who also learn things from Imam Hussain to be like him, or from Hazrat Abbas to be sacrificial, to be etc. But I agree with you that despite these beautiful outcomes of giving us strength, allowing us to have a kind of emotional release, a kind of emotional support, there is still so much that we need to learn and benefit, because I feel like a lot of us do not become more like Imam Hussain after 40, 50 years of going to these sessions. Right? We do benefit from it to deal with our pain, but when we look back at ourselves, how much are we more like Imam Hussain? I feel like that's where we're really failing. And the reason I think why this is happening is because most of the times the emphasis on our sessions is either, as you said, on an abstract way of looking at the Imam. And as you know, abstract ideas never change lives, right? As long as theology or introduction to Imam is abstract, like, yes, the Imam is this. I always said, if you tell someone, for example, that Aliyun ma'al haq wal haqqu ma Ali, this won't change their life, right? You have to show them, how is this relevant to your life? Okay, Imam alayhi salam is with the truth. What do I do now, leaving this session? How can I be more like Imam Ali? So as long as our introduction of the Imam is abstract, and in the personal, emotional level, which is usually during the matam or the last part of the lecture, what I realized is that we focus more not on what Imam Hussain did, but what Umar ibn Sa'd and his group did, right? If you think about it, our sessions are more a commemoration of the actions of the enemies, the army of Yazid, the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, right? We say, yes, they killed the Imam like this, they threw stones like this, they attacked like this, they attacked that child like this, right? They did this to that child, they deprived them of water. Okay, whose actions are these? These are all the actions of Umar bin Sa'd and the army of Yazid. What kind of lessons are there for us? None, zero. These are the actions of people we do not want to be like, right? Whose action is going to be beneficial for us? Whose action is going to throw light? Is the actions of Imam Hussain, his army, and these are usually undermined, right? The main focus should be on how did Imam Hussain, how did Habib al-Madahir, how did, for example, the daughter of Imam Hussain, how did Lady Zainab deal with this suffering? But the way we tell the story, it seems like it was a defeat, right? We emphasize so much on the actions of the people who attacked Imam Hussain, and very little emphasize on how they dealt with it. And if someone looks at the way we're looking at these sessions, they may think like Imam Hussain was defeated, right? You know, everyone's sad, no one's inspired. Yes, maybe to some extent we are inspired. We are inspired to be patient like Lady Zainab. But in addition to that, in what other ways are we inspired, right? Very little. And that's, I think, because we still have so much more to focus on the actions of the Imam and his camp. And inshallah, today I'll give you one example of this so that we'll see how different the story would be, right? Because as you mentioned very beautifully, that if you want to look at what Yazid and Omar bin Sa'ad did, you can't really justify why Ashura is so important. Because in terms of being cruel, in terms of an army of cruel people, violent people, attacking innocent, beautiful people, this has been done a lot in history, worse crimes. So what makes Ashura special is not the kind of actions, the killing, the keeping people thirsty. It's not that. What makes Ashura special is the reaction that the people who were on the receiving end of the oppression showed. And that's what makes Ashura special, but that's the part in which, to which we pay less attention usually during our sessions. Inshallah, as we go on today, I'll give a few examples and I'll show how life-changing it can be to create this shift in our sessions.
Yeah, so what we've done is we have essentially made the Imam a passive recipient of his experience rather than using his eyes as the lens to his experiences. And that being the case, it's hard to translate that, and that's too theoretical. I get the point which yourself and Br.Adam made. It becomes way too abstract to be applicable in a real life scenario where I'm facing something similar. This is very true. You mentioned something about suffering, so I want to circle in on this just a little bit. I know we have many instances to go through.
Sure.
A person goes through suffering in their life. They go to majalis and they somehow feel inspired by Imam Hussain to deal with their suffering. It works sometimes, other times it doesn't work. When does it work? As you mentioned, when we can't cry in our own lives, we use Imam Hussain to have an outlet for emotion. A person dies, we do majalis in their name, these kind of things. In fact, people who can't attend majalis this year, I think this will hit them a bit harder, that we're lacking that physical space to go and let out our emotions, so they'll need to deal with it in a different way. That in those sense it kind of works. Where does it not work? When a person goes through other forms of suffering which are not clearly demonstrated on Ashura, the hidden suffering, the silent suffering, the ones which we don't focus on in the majalis. When you look at the events of Ashura and Imam Hussain and his life in general, do you see a man who is dealing with his suffering in a way in which we can adopt, who's dealing with his trials in a way which is transferable, or is it still a standard which seems unattainable?
Okay, very beautiful, very beautiful. Is it okay if I be a little bit naughty and address your question, but with a little bit of introduction? But
it's not only okay, it's expected, Sheikh.
Yeah, I'm expected to be naughty. So, see, because actually my focus in the past year has been on a lot of ways in which we are suffering.
Exactly,
which leads to us not enjoying life. You know, I mentioned this sentence once, that life has become so difficult for us because of our anxieties, our stress, our fears, our worries and stress, that we're hoping by the end of it, or maybe after we die, we become peaceful. That's why we tell each other, may you rest in peace. Whereas peace has to be a quality that, is with us through our life so that we get to focus on our more important goals, right? Peace is not an outcome of a human being's life. Peace should be something we have so that we can focus on more important goals, right? So yes, so we have all of this. Now, when you look at the reason behind a lot of these sufferings, it usually goes back to an implicit learning that happened to us when we were younger, when sometimes very really young as a child. A false belief was formed in us. And because it is, they say when you learn something through emotion in an early age, it is impossible to let go of it just through thoughts and being talked to, right? It has a process of dealing with that. And a lot of our suffering actually goes back to these implicit learnings we've had as children. Now, let me give you one example and then link that to the story of Ashura and to show how much beneficial it can be, but it's not yet. It's not yet. So a clear case of a problem that a person can have is anxiety, right? Stressing so much over deadlines, over works, over many things. One of the techniques we have in therapy to help a person with anxiety is to create a kind of connection between them, the responsible part of them who now wants to heal, and a part who's wounded, and this connection often brings up the incident in which this issue was caused, right? So the implicit learning which happened as a result of which now this person is feeling anxious and has anxiety. And of course, there can be so many different reasons. I'm just going to give one example of a real example to show how this works. So the model I like and I follow is that most of the issues we have, even like anxiety, at some point, it was the best solution we could find to our issue, right? So although it has side effects right now, but at the time when we chose to follow this, to add this to ourselves, it was the best solution. Now, let's say you feel anxious and you start creating this connection with the wounded part, with the wounded self. Why are you anxious? And then during this process, we realize that, okay, it's because we're putting too much pressure on ourselves. If you don't do this, we'll fail, right? And then you're like, okay, why are you putting so much pressure on yourself, right? And by the way, these are very, very deep things, which just by knowing that it's wrong, it won't be healed, right? Mm-hmm. So this is, again, as I said, a real example. The person was anxious. Through the process of therapy, they realized it's because the wounded part manifested that this is because of too much pressure. And then the person was trying to figure out, okay, why am I putting so much pressure on myself? And then they realized that this goes back to their childhood. And the parenting that they received was that if you fail, you won't be loved, right? The love as parents were giving you depends on you acing this exam or performing really well in whatever thing we expect you to, right? So this conditional love, that you're only loved if you perform well, was given to this child. The only way this child could cope with this was, okay, I will become perfect. I won't fail ever so that I can receive the love that I need, right? So at that point, this pressure that the child put on itself was the best way it could deal with, not receiving unconditional love. Mm-hmm. And so slowly throughout life, even though they'd forgotten about that incident, they carried this with themselves. They put pressure on themselves with everything. And the deep underlying issue was that they felt, if I fail, I will not be loved, right? I will not be worthy as a human being. Okay, now, what does this have to do with Ashura? This shows us that no matter what we learn in our theology classes or from the lecture, like about God, about humanity, about all of this, these kind of beliefs, aqa'id we have in our mind will not do anything for us in our life. Okay, let me make this more clear. The person who thinks they're not loved or they're not worthy, right? Or if by if they fail once, they won't be loved. If you think about this, these are beliefs that actually have a lot to do with religion. Because in religion, when you look at the nature of a human being, you would say that no, a human being, no matter how many mistakes they make, they're still worthy, right? In religion, we have this belief that you receive unconditional love from God. And a person may have heard this in a lecture, may have heard this in their aqa'id class. I mean, they better have heard it, because there are some who don't even say this in their aqa'id class. But even if you've heard it, even if you believe that as a human being, your fitra is given by God, your ruh is God-given, and it has, what do we call it, worth no matter what. But if this is just in your mind, it doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't change your life, right? So this is why I think most of us, religion is only in our mind, not in our heart. And it's in our heart where we have most of these issues and problems. So far I'm saying a lot of the times the root of our sufferings, anxiety, stress, is a false belief which we actually believe it's contradictory in religion, but because it's in our mind, it doesn't do anything. Now, how can Imam Hussain come to this issue and find a way out? Well, first of all, a lot of these beliefs we hold about ourselves are learned at a very young and early age, right? So if I come and tell that person who's having anxiety that, no, you're very worthy, God loves you. The Prophet said, "An-nas kama'adan al-fiddati wa-dhahab." People are like mines of gold. It doesn't do much now because the belief is already, kept there. When was the right time to do this? The right time was at childhood. And how? Do you say these beliefs? No. The way that child formed that belief that I am not worthy, if I make a mistake, no one would love me. No one told her or her that. How did that child form that belief? Through the actions of the parents. So the way theology is transferred from one generation to another generation is not through classes or lectures. It's through their actions.
This is such a good point, Sheikh.
So tell your child how many times you want. God is loving. Yeah. But then tell them, if you fail in this exam, auntie won't love you, or I won't cook you. That's it. All the theology out of the window, right? Rubbish. And it's very interesting. We even have hadiths that when your child is young, if you make a promise to them, make sure you keep it, because you are like the God to them. The hadith is so clear, right? So if a parent doesn't keep a promise to their child, the belief that the child will form about the universe is that in this universe, those who take care of you will break their promises. And eventually that's a belief about God. So if as a parent, we don't keep our promise to our child, we're giving them a theology which says God is not just. God won't keep their promises. Now, having said all of that, how is this relevant to the story of Imam Hussain? In the story of Imam Hussain, and of course, this is not in any session. It would be in a session in which we actually, as you said, don't make Imam Hussain passive, but Imam Hussain is the active part of the story, of the session. Let me give you one story, for example, between Imam Hussain and Hur, right? Of course, a lot of the times we mention this, but we don't always highlight how this can create beautiful beliefs in us. Hur is the person who stopped the caravan of Imam Hussain, right? Hur ibn Riyahib. And in some way, we can say everything started through his mistake. He came and he established this whole situation, whole problem was started by him. Then he decides to change, right? And then how does Imam Hussain treat Hur? It's very important. Imam Hussain says, there is no problem. You can join us And when Hur is still feeling embarrassed after Imam accepts him, his head is down, his head is low, he's embarrassed. Imam says, no, irfa' ra'sak, hold your head high, right? There is nothing to be ashamed about. Even though you made all sorts of terrible, crazy mistakes, right? I don't know if you've been talking with a person who doesn't have self-love. One of the things they say, like if you tell them, no, God loves you. One of the things they usually say is that, but you don't know what I've done, right? They have this fear that their actions are so bad, it means that God won't love them. No, we don't know what I've done. Well, Hur has done some of the worst things you can imagine, right? But Imam Hussain says, no, irfa' ra'sak. As soon as you decide to heal, everything is done. And in a session, this has to be opened up. It has to be opened up and explained that this means that a human being, no matter what they do, a human being does not have the power to damage their worth, right? No one else has, even we don't have. Yes, you made mistakes, but you are like a jewelry, right? The hadith from Prophet says you're like a jewelry. No matter what you do, it's like a very precious jewelry, let's say, is wrapped in dirt now. But will anyone say that this jewelry is not worthy anymore? No, we just clean it, right? And so this story, this incident between Imam Hussain and between Hur can be a great incident for creating a beautiful belief in an individual, especially if they're young. And as I said, if the person who's organizing the session, is aware how to conduct this, so that when the person is emotional, this belief is formed in them, that no matter what you do, you are worthy. And as soon as you decide to heal, there's nothing to be ashamed of. You have unconditional love from God. And we see this, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. I'll just say one more point because it's very closely linked to this from Imam Hussain. Again, another incident in which we're missing an opportunity for forming beautiful beliefs. Shamr, or, well, in a lot of reports we have Shamr, but in some reports we have mention of another name, whoever it was, who was on the chest of Imam Hussain to do what he wanted to do, right? To take the life of Imam Hussain. Sees Imam Hussain is crying. Says, wow, so you're finally scared of dying, huh? What does Imam Hussain say? Hussain says, no, I'm worried for you. What did you do to yourself? God gave you a soul, and what are you doing with it, right? And imagine having this much love for even the soul of Shamr, right? What does that say? The idea that, and these are, again, I think, a lot of missed opportunities of Ashura. The way Imam Hussain looks at the soul of a human being is so different to the way we look at a human being. Imam Hussain says, no, every person, their soul is given by God. And God says, la tabdil, right? There is no change in what God creates. A soul is given by God and it's beautiful. We can wrap it with dirt, but what's inside? And Imam Hussain still has, felt love even for Shem, because what did you do to yourself? Your soul that God gave you deserved much better, right? And this would instill deep theological beliefs in a child, if it's done right, about God's love. The idea that God loves you so much unconditionally. The idea that your worth cannot be affected by anyone or even by your own actions, right? It's very deep beliefs that often it's because we don't have them that we have all sorts of issues. And no matter how many times they tell us in theology class, it won't be beneficial because that's not how it works. So because I'm talking too much, I'll stop here, but there's more to say, inshallah, on this.
Should I add my own thoughts now, or? Yeah, so I can't stop listening to Sheikh Javad. He's got so much good stuff to say. So yeah, so there's two major things that are coming to my mind right now, based on the discussion that we've had.
Yeah.
One of them is how to overcome negative suffering, and the reason I'm calling it negative is because I don't want to give the impression that this world can be free from any kind of suffering. It's just impossible. It's the nature of it, right? But a negative suffering defined as something which prevents us from reaching our potential, right? And then there's another thing, which is the emphasis on God, right? There doesn't seem to be like a disconnect between overcoming suffering, achieving peace, and God. It's all one and the same, right? So when we're speaking of peace, because this is what all human beings are searching for. They're searching for peace, they're searching for love, and they're searching for happiness, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
Or in general, they're trying to become the best version of themselves, right? But today we live in an age where there's more than ever, there's a plurality of beliefs, right? So even if we were to, as many people have done, they've tried to introduce the message of Imam Hussain to other people. And it has been beneficial, as you said before. We don't want to make it look as if it's just been negative. Even for myself, there's been things that have been inspired by the Imams to do, right? Yeah. But then if we're trying to see things through the eyes of the Imam, as Abbas said, right? We see that the Imam had a very unique kind of special kind of thing that he was trying to, a specific focus that he was trying to achieve, right? His message was that, yes, I'm here to, you know, reform this society. I'm here to stop oppression. I'm here to bring the good back, you know, and do all those things which many of us are trying to do in the world today. But then that's all under the umbrella of I'm trying to restore the authentic message, the sunnah of the Prophet, which ultimately goes back to God himself, right? And you've mentioned this, right? Now, the problem is, as we said earlier, that there's a very theologically abstract approach towards that. So even if we say, okay, yes, the message of Imam Hussain was ultimately to go back to La ilaha illallah, there's no God but Allah, there's no deity worthy of worship but Allah, what does that even mean to us, right? And it's something that I've been questioning for myself. So when we're saying we're trying to overcome this suffering and achieve our potential, how can we explain this, that even people who have accepted religion already can understand it in a way that they have a clear idea of where they're going to? Because when, for example, you read the books of spirituality, those kind of things on how to reach your potential, they talk about the relationship that we're meant to be having with God, that we're meant to know God, but it's very theoretical. It's not something which your mind can connect to. It sounds nice, but it doesn't actually really do anything other than hoping that you can achieve something like that. So I was just wondering, because even for myself, I don't want to just be telling people, well, you know, the purpose of, you know, Islam, the Quran is to have knowledge of God, to know God. What does that even mean? How is that related to what I'm trying to achieve in life? So, as I said, because we're dealing with a plurality of beliefs, and we are saying that God is the central focus of this all, in a very Islamic way, not in a we're defining God as anything as people have been defining it. How does that then qualify our definition of achieving that peace, of overcoming our suffering and achieving what we're meant to do? Like, what is it that the human being is going towards in a way that makes sense to them, that isn't just a concept?
Beautiful. Beautiful. So if we want to go to the message of Imam Hussain, and you're saying that how can we make sure it's not abstract? How can we be sure we know what it is? I think we can create 3 levels of messages Imam Hussain has, and these 3 levels come together to change our life. And I agree with you that a lot of people have been trying to share the message of Imam Hussain. A lot of the times they've been successful. We've had great movements that have started out of this message. And a lot of the times they fail because I think they didn't themselves know what exactly is the message of Imam Hussain. Like, what can we learn from Imam Hussain is not an easy thing to know, especially if the only information you have is what you're getting in some sessions, right? I want to divide the message of Imam Hussain in 3 levels. One is things that Imam Hussain tells us, and by message, by the way, I just mean what we can learn from Imam. One of them is the look Imam Hussain has at a human being, right? What is the definition of a human being, the qualities of a human being in the worldview of Imam Hussain? The second one is about social responsibilities. And of course, a lot of this is actually before the events of Muharram. Imam Hussain, some of Imam Hussein's best speeches and letters are actually way earlier on, the ones that he wrote to the people of Kufa, long before so many terrible things had happened. Even during the life of Muawiyah, Imam had some amazing, very beneficial letters, which have so many great lessons on the role of any human being, the responsibility of every human being in front of oppression, the idea that if you're oppressed and you don't do your best to stop that, you are going to be in the same place as the oppressor. These are very powerful messages, which unfortunately are a lot of the times not emphasized, right? The idea that you are not allowed, according to Imam Hussain, to accept oppression, right? In accepting oppression and not doing all you can to stop it is considered the same, exactly the same as the oppression. And these are in Imam Hussein's letters to the people of Kufa, in which he's telling them, why on earth are you allowing someone to oppress you and not doing your best? And of course, in that circumstance, he knew that they can do better. But now the issue is this. So we said and then the third level is, of course, the relation between a human being and God. So I see, at least with regards to these 3 things, so much we can learn from Imam Hussain. The third one, we're so far from it that I'm not going to talk about it in this session, the relation between a person and a God. Let's talk about these 2. The social responsibility we have in front of, against injustice, against oppression, which a lot of people right now actually do have that care and concern, right? Even people who've never heard about Imam Hussain, when you look at them, they're like, yeah, I want to do that. There are many people who are more active than the Shias and Muslims in fighting against injustice and oppression. And that's why a lot of the times people who don't have a clear understanding of Imam Hussein's life fail to explain, then if there are already people who are fighting against injustice and oppression, then what's the use of Imam Hussain, right? If not, only as another motivator, as another great source of motivation. But what is Imam Hussain bringing to the table, which is new? And this is where you see a lot of us fail to explain. Because if it's only this idea that you have to stand against injustice and even, give your life, there are a lot of people in the history who've done that. But in order to explain this, we have to go to the first one, and that is the understanding Imam Hussain has about a human being and how this understanding can help a person perform better in their duty or in their role in establishing peace and justice in the world. Because a lot of us actually do want to do something for all this oppression in the world, and a lot of us are failing. And the reason a lot of us are failing sometimes is the resistance by the ones in power, but a lot of the time the resistance is coming from our own life, right? I want to do something for people in Kashmir. I want to do something for people in that country, but I wake up in the morning, I'm just not motivated to do anything. I've got so much my own problems. I've got my own stories. I've got my own worries, right? I try to sleep at night. My thoughts, my worries don't even allow me to have a proper sleep. So how can I focus on other things, right? If you think about it, maybe 50-60% of our capacity, of our energy as human beings are taken by our own worries, anxieties, stresses, and sometimes goals which are not our genuine goals, but goals that we've only set so that we don't feel some of our anxieties, the triggers for our anxieties, right? If I feel insecure about something, suddenly I create a goal for my life so that that insecurity is not triggered, but that goal is not my main goal. Whereas it's taking a lot of my energy. And you see so many beautiful people in the world, but they're allowing injustice and oppression to carry on in amounts which are unbelievable. And the reason for that is that we still don't know how to deal with ourselves, right? And so we spend most of our energy not doing anything beneficial. And then it's in this aspect that Imam Hussain has so much for us to learn from, but only if we deal with him as a real in a real and non-cliche manner. If in our session Yazid is the hero, Yazid is the one we focus on, then obviously there's not much to learn. But if you look at the story of Ashura and you don't see defeat, you see a victory by Imam Hussain, then you have to explain where did that victory came from. Then, for example, you may see that Imam Hussain showed through his life that no one can hurt you. What does that mean? Well, obviously they hurt Imam Hussain. Isn't that what we all talk about during these 10 days? That yes, they hurt the Imam like this, they hurt the Imam like that, which is against the message of the Imam. Imam and his companions were very clear in their message that you cannot hurt us. You can hurt this body that God gave us as an amana while we're in this world, which you did. You hurt this body in all sorts of ways, but you can never hurt me. This message is very clear in the teachings of Lady Zainab and the teaching of Imam Hussain, the companions of Imam Hussain, this idea that a human being is something that can never be harmed by anyone else. If we just take this idea, there is so much beautiful psychological and spiritual teachings that we can get from this, right? One of the main problems we have in life that cause a lot of hurt and offense for us is this idea that, oh yes, someone said something to me which was offensive, someone broke my heart, someone did this to me, someone did that to me. And in all of these situations, we live believing that this person can actually hurt me, right? And of course, they can hurt my body, that's for sure. But what about my inner subjective experience of life, right? And now, of course, a lot of the psychologists who are working with trauma and healing, a lot of spiritual teachers are telling us that the first step for healing, the first step for recovery is taking responsibility for how you feel. Understanding that no matter what a person does to you, they can hurt your body, they can create pain for sure, but they cannot hurt who you are. So how can I find that place in me that cannot be harmed by others? Which, as you can see, Lady Zainab, they did all sorts of things to her, and she says, وَمَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا. She doesn't mean the fact that Imam Hussain got killed is beautiful. Definitely not. The physical injury, all of that was there, and she saw that. But she says, I have found a place inside me, which is not my body, right? A place beyond my thoughts, beyond my body, beyond, where no one can hurt me, no one can harm me, right? So that is, it is things like this from stories of Imam Hussain that can open doors for us of knowing ourselves better, finding places inside us that can give us the control of our experience. And then once a person knows themselves like that, once a person has this much control over themselves, then a lot of time and energy would immediately be opened up for them. Right? Because as I said, a lot of our energy right now is being consumed by just taking care of ourselves. And you can find a place inside you, you can connect yourself in such a way that all of these are solved from the root. And of course, in order to make this real, in order to make this teaching accessible for people, so that they don't just hear that Imam Hussain was like that or Lady Zainab was like that, because that's what we're like. Yes, Lady Zainab said, وَمَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا. But no, we have to look at this and then find ways and methods to create the same in our life. But we can only do that if we're honest with ourselves. And I feel like right now we're not. Because on the one hand, we say Lady Zainab said, وَمَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا, but we commemorate Ashura as if it was an ugly thing, as if as if sadness is dominant, as if pain is dominant. So we say Lady Zainab said beauty is dominant, but the way we commemorate, pain is the dominant force, sadness is the dominant force, hurt is the dominant force, right? So we need to be honest and say, no, maybe we've made a mistake. Pain was there, suffering was there, hurt was there, but there was also so much more there. There was beauty, there was growth, there was finding a place inside the person that can never be harmed. And there was jokes there. They were making jokes. Well, why? How? right? And we can only learn from them if we discuss these things. And there's so much to learn from these. There's so much, but only if we create this paradigm shift. And I'm sorry I talk so much.
No, Sheikh, I want to give like an instance, a specific instance for how we apply this approach.
Yeah.
So what the earlier parts of your remarks are really helpful to understand the reason why we have not allowed Imam Hussain to change the condition of our communities, because we've not allowed him to change the condition of ourselves. And so because we didn't start it from the ground up, that's why we're in many terrible conditions in which we're in. And that being the case, now we are not using Abu Abdullah to look at our suffering in the way that he looks at his suffering. So I think that was the theme of the question. And then when we do go through something which is quite hard for us and difficult, we know that he accomplished, like we know that he overcame. And it's like, okay, whatever I'm going through, he went through something much harder and I can get through it because I know he got through it. But that's still too abstract. As you mentioned, we need to go much, much lower into the examples. I'll give an example for this one. Heartbreak, which you mentioned. The death of a loved one, the parting of a loved one, heartbreak between people, which happens. You see that in the death of a loved one. Here comes Sayyidah Zainab sallallahu alayhi, who says, I see nothing but beauty, in an instance where she has witnessed her own children and her family and her beloved brother dying in front of her eyes. She interprets that heartbreak and she reflects upon that and sees everything around it and sees the beauty. But here's the point. She's also seeing the death when she says beauty. She's also seeing the actual gruesome acts. And even that is part of her beauty, which she sees. So the question then is, what does it mean to look at your suffering today in terms of heartbreak and loss and interpret that as beauty? How does it look for us?
Exactly. So, it's very important to know that a lot of the times these things, in order to be solved, some fundamental beliefs in us have to change, right? So, for example, if a person wants to, let's say, deal with a loss of a loved one, right, or with a very difficult pain, it's not just that they can decide to, okay, this person was strong, I can be strong as well. No, we have to look inside, see what are the reasons we still have not been connected to our true self, right? Because ultimately, this is the solution. When you are connected to your true self, to the center of who you are, when you found that part of you that is connected to God, then you are receiving God's unconditional love and support, and you feel that, even though it's always there, you feel that. And suddenly everything changes for you, right? Imam Ali alayhi salam has this line that they get to see something so large, so beautiful, so important, right? That comparison to that, everything feels easy to take on, right? But this is not knowing, this is experiencing it, right? Imagine if a person loses 100 pounds and immediately they receive a phone call that you just won £1 million in, like, I don't know, some competition, right? But in order to get this, it's not about theology classes, it's not about listening to, it's about experiencing it, finding it deep inside yourself. And of course, in order to get there, there are steps that we have to take. As you said, we just say the last thing, we don't say the methods. There's so much we can talk about the methods, but that would require sessions and sessions. I just want to mention one thing. One of the things, for example, that we've unfortunately not paid attention to, and it leads to a lot of suffering for people, is the issue of their relationship with God and also their relationship with death. With regards to God, even though in the story of Imam Hussain, there is so much about God's unconditional love, about the idea that God will always love a human being no matter what they've done, right? Imagine, a lot of people come to me, brother, and they're upset. And when I'm there, why don't you go to God? They're like, well, I don't feel like God loves me, right? We've done things to people that after 14 centuries of Islam, they go against the first verse of the Quran, like in the like Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, right? Even if they claim God is kind and merciful, look, where is his mercy and kindness if God can't love you? Right? What have you done? What do you think you've done which is bigger than God's love and mercy? And this is where I say we failed Imam Hussain, because look at Dua Arafah. It's crazy. I was just reading it before the podcast. Imam Hussain says, you were kind and beautiful and loving to me before my mistakes. Am I really going to claim that my mistakes stop your love? Like my mistakes are that large that can stop your love? We have the same from Imam Sajjad. We have very similar from Imam Sadiq. Like, no, it's your tradition to be nice to mistake, right? When you, and as I said, a lot of our issues and problems actually go back to this idea that we don't feel loved. You know, for those who've been in a romantic relationship, they know that when you're in the heat of the, you know, the relationship, the first stages, when it's so, nothing matters. You could be in the worst condition that, like, but because you're next to someone you love, everything's beautiful. And the way for this to have this constantly is to feel this love from God. But we have not told people how loving God is, you know, and a very clear way to know this is to ask people, do you feel you are unconditionally loved by God? How many people would say yes? Forget about do you feel, do you believe, do you think you are? A lot of them say, me, no, unconditionally loved. So, whereas this is there in the teachings of Imam Hussain, another thing is death. We have ruined death for people. We've turned death into this very dark, very scary thing that as soon as you die, there's going to be some scary people, there are scary angels waiting to count your deeds and stuff. Whereas one of the beautiful things about Imam Hussain and his companions was this line that Imam Hussain and his companions conquered death. They said, in al-maut ahla min al-asad, sweeter than honey. Death is beautiful. And in the teachings of Imam Hussain, there are so many, examples of this, in which Imam Hussain says, death is the meeting of God, meeting of the beloved. How could it not be beautiful? How could it not be amazing? Right? So two important things that can provide support for us. One is our relationship with God, and the other one, knowing that this world will one day finish with all its pain, and we're going to go to a place where we feel this unconditional love and support. We've ruined both. We've told people God will judge you, God is scary, and we've told them death is, you can end up in a terrible place, death is scary, right? So two support systems are taken away from us. Two support systems which in Imam Hussein's message are very, very important. Read Dua Arafah. It's all emphasis of how God's loving, unconditional love, and how death is beautiful. In Ashura as well, you see that. You see, Habib says, I am excited to die because I know where I'm going. But then on the day that we're thinking about Habib, we're all like, oh, poor Habib, this is what happened to him. Habib himself, he says, I'm happy for what's happening to me.
Ninth Muharram, he is laughing and joking and he's having an ecstatic time with Burayr and the companions.
Exactly.
Ninth Muharram. Their experience of death is radically different to how we even use that word.
Very different. And so, of course, it is sad what happened to him. But if you want to say that part, you also have to say the other part, which is 1,000 times more important. And that's how you know, what was his own subjective experience.
In fact, sorry, Sheikh, if you take that sentence out from the Masa'ib of people like Habib, it's as if they are a different personality altogether, because the moment you, even if you forget that sentence, it just has to be a sentence. By the way, he embraced death. By the way, he was happy. But imagine the whole narrative changes if you take that sentiment away. Exactly. And that sentiment is not widespread on our minbar or our majalis. It's not always there.
Exactly. And that has to be the dominant force. Otherwise, you're not commemorating Imam Hussain. We're commemorating Umar ibn Sa'd. Because that's like, it is in that one sentence that we get to know Habib.
It's so subtle, it's so fine.
Exactly. Otherwise, it could be anyone else who got killed. What is the significance? So so there's so much to talk about, but I think we covered hopefully a good amount.
Brother Adam, what were some of your points there answered in that exchange?
To be honest, Sheikh Jawad says so many things that you have to take a lot of time to reflect on them. But, you know, hopefully I'm not repeating any points from myself earlier or from Sheikh, but it's really trying to figure out how to take this story without forgetting the tragedy of it, but how to take it in a way that's actually going to help you with your growth. Because as we said, for a lot of people, it's become an emotional outlet, right? And that itself is not a negative thing. But then when it doesn't really do much more than that for most people, then you have to think, well, what is the significance of this, right? And I think for a lot of people, and I don't mean this to criticize anyone, it's more like trying to see the problem for what it is and try to come up with a solution. But when we think about Imam Hussain, because as Sheikh said, what is the Imam bringing that's new to the table? Because if we're going to discuss this amongst ourselves, let alone with other people who may not share our beliefs in Islam or God or whatever, because as you said, there's a lot of people these days who don't even believe in God, right? But when we're asking ourselves, well, what is it that this Imam did that was so different? I feel like the way that the story has been communicated is that this person is important because they have this status and they're close to God. And by the way, here is a story that they went through and it's sad. Rather than this is a person who I get to know, who I begin to admire, and then through that it changes me. So for example, someone who, relatively contemporary, Malcolm X, he's a person who inspires me, not because he had a high position in the nation or what he did after, but rather the actual change that he went through, right? And how I can relate to that as a person, right? There's a lot of things I can still take from him, which I haven't yet grasped, but it's so much more different to, here's a person who I should believe has a high status, and therefore this is their story, rather than this is their story, and this is who they are, and this is what their message is. Do you see like how much of a difference those two narratives make? Because you're starting off with for lack of better words, but I almost feel like you start off feeling like you are forced to believe the Imam is important, rather than figure out why he's important, and then understanding that.
I understand, and I think this is a challenge that it's been echoed a lot. And it's one thing that I've been always trying to address. I've heard the same about Lady Fatima. A lot of people tell me that we keep being told that she's a great role model, but they don't give us concrete, real ways in which we can benefit from her, apart from, for example, like modesty. But like, okay, she's my role model. Give me some methods, give me some lessons, give me some stories, give me something that I can work with. And unfortunately, that is true. And that is why I said I believe, like I'm speaking about myself, I feel like I have failed the Ahl al-Bayt. And it's, but on the other side, it means that with every shortcoming that we have is a sign for opportunities. That as great and as beneficial as Ashura has been, there's still so much more it can give to us. And that can be achieved through the works of people like yourself, who see that there's something missing. They've been told that there's something great here, but they were not convinced of what is the greatness, or what is the relevance, or what is the practical nature of this. And so it is our job now to find these things, because they are there. Initially I was very much upset when I came across things like this. Like, you keep telling me this book is special. Even with regards to Quran, if you ask a lot of people, how can Quran change your life? They don't know, right? But they keep still insisting this book is special. And initially I would get very upset, like, what's wrong with this? And then I realized, well, people have different roles. Some people have firmly tasted the importance of something without having the intellectual capacity to articulate what is special about it. And their role is to transfer this to the next generation, to give them the access to then go and find the gems which are there, which we even have in the hadith, that رب حامل فقه إلى من هو أفقه منه. There are a lot of people whose job is to pass this on to the next generation, to some people who would then have a better understanding of it. So we have to be very grateful for people who carried this tradition, who carried the ceremonies of Ashura, delivered this to us. And if we feel like there is any shortcoming, which I definitely feel there is, then that would be our responsibility to go and look for these gems. And there's actually a lot. There's a lot of gems, even with regards to what you were saying, right? Imam Hussain has many hadiths, many hadiths that many of us don't know, right? And not just the hadith, but a lot of people go and find the hadiths. But once you've found the hadith, let me give you one example of hadith from Imam Hussain. He says, if a person comes and swears at you in your right ear, says something very rude, and then comes to your left ear and says, I didn't do it, accept that. Okay? Now, first of all, crazy hadith, but even if you say this hadith, it's not enough. You have to explain, you have to think, you have to read if you want to do justice to Imam Hussain. How? Why? Right? What can I change in myself that even if someone comes and swears at me in my right ear and immediately comes to them in left ear and says, I didn't do it, I say, okay. Do you know that just by thinking about this, like, oh, there's a way to do this? How? Right? Not just maybe half of relationship arguments would be over if we could just listen to this one hadith. But it's not just by saying it, let alone that most of our sessions, we don't even mention hadiths from Imam Hussain. If you ask people, say 10 hadiths from Imam Hussain, they wouldn't know. But even saying it is not enough. You have to think about this. Why? How? Hassan, is this even possible? What are the methods to be like that? Right? Then Imam Hussain would become a figure that can change our lives. Right? When we take him seriously, his message, and think about it, think for methods from where we are to the standard, not just give people the standard. You have to give them every single step of the way. And if we feel like this shortcoming is there, then it's our responsibility to fix this.
Sheikh, whether or not we achieve this type of growth, it seems throughout this entire discussion, and we're coming towards the end of it, it's dependent on how we teach each other about Ashura. So the communication is where the solution lies. What we choose to tell each other about, how we put the message, with which language, like all of the growth we want comes from how it's put to us. Now, already we have certain conventions of Ashura which have developed through history. Mourning for Abu Abdullah, crying for him, majalis. Like these are existing things which have survived.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned throughout the discussion, they serve certain functions and they are not helping other things that people still need.
Yeah.
So as a kind of final question to you is, how do we use these existing institutions, mourning, majalis, where we have crying, poetry, how do we use them and channel them towards the growth of the individual? And this is the last remark, so please give us your best gem, Sheikh.
Bless you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I think it's very important for us to appreciate the kind of events that were given to us. You know, initially when you come across the shortcomings of something, it's very easy to judge it and say, oh, why is it? But it's also very important to know that if it wasn't for these kind of sessions, many of us may not have learned about Imam Hussain. So we have to be very grateful for every single person who tried to, keep this tradition going. All the sessions, they're very beautiful. They've given so much support for a lot of people. And what is the way to improve on what beautiful things we already have is to be real. Right? I think being real and having expectations is very important. So for example, actually we mentioned one example. If Lady Zainab said, وَمَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا, don't let that go. Don't let that go. Think about it. Why did she say that? Well, how is the killing of Ali Asghar Ali Akbar beautiful? Was she lying? Was she exaggerating? Was she saying something poetic? If she meant it, then what kind of mind state was she in? What kind of spiritual state was she in? How can I get there? What are the requirements, right? Just not letting that one sentence go would open doors, because then maybe you'll be like, you know what, this Muharram, all I want to think about is this. I want to go to everyone and ask them this. Right? Another thing we can do is, okay, if we want to, because a lot of people love Imam Hussain, beautiful, and they want to spread the message of Imam Hussain. Okay, what is the message of Imam Hussain? What did he do? Go and read about his life. And then think about all of it, right? It's very important to have expectations and to be real. Imam Hussain is meant to change our lives. Has he changed our life, really? Yes, there are many advantages we're taking. But let's look at myself 10 years ago. Let's look at the previous generation who are now 60 years old, 7 years old, 50 years old. How is their life different to a person who doesn't know about Imam Hussain? Right? Let's say between a Shia who loves Imam Hussain and a person who doesn't love. How are they different? It seems like they both pray the same way. They both get anxious the same way. Yes, maybe this one, when he's upset a little bit, sometimes he thinks about Imam Hussain, gets some strength, right? Yes, so it's kind of, okay, in addition to that, what are the changes? And maybe you can come up with a few differences. Maybe you can't, but be honest with yourself and then expect results, because there's so many gems, but we can only find them if we look for them. And I think we gave some hints today for places in which people can go and look for more. Like one was, what is Imam Hussein's definition of a human being? The idea that the human's worth will never be affected. The idea that death is beautiful. The idea that God gives us unconditional love. Well, a lot of these can be things that we can look for more, and each of them I think can be a journey. But this journey will only begin if we're honest and expect and have expectations. And I really hope that inshallah we all benefit more and more from Imam Hussain.
Ilahi, inshallah. And that is the final remarks of this episode on Ashura and Growth. Thank you so much, Sheikh Javad Shomali. Thank you to Br.Adam. And I guess thank you to the listener for listening. And alhamdulillah, I think we should end, it's only appropriate, on a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
محمد وعجل many. It appears that there are many beautiful aspects of Imam al-Hussein's conduct and personality that we are neglecting in the way that we mourn for him, or that we are not getting the most of, as we've seen in this discussion. This idea that Allah loves you unconditionally, the unconditional love of God, for example, the idea that death is a thing to embrace, not a thing to be fearful of, or the idea that the human being is made of a heart which has its own oscillations and it has its own features, and we should not ever be worried that Allah does not love us or that our heart is not capable of achieving our goals. So we ask all of the listeners who are paying attention that look for these things in Muharram. Look for Imam al-Hussain as a way to love God unconditionally, or as a way to beat death, to cheat death, to be victorious over death in your love for God. And once you look for it, as Sheikh Javad says, you will find it. Expect that he will improve your life. But yeah, we have to seek it to truly, truly appreciate the more esoteric manifestations of Abu Abdullah and Imam al-Hussein's mission on the day of Ashura.